Hi, everybody, and welcome to Courageous Conversations about our schools. This is your host, Ken Feudernick. Before we begin, picture this city, a community of nearly 100,000 people where a third of the residents are living in poverty. A school district with 16,000 students, hundreds of them are homeless, and thousands are simply not showing up to class. That was the grim reality in Reading, Pennsylvania, right after the pandemic. This is a story about Reading's community and educational leaders who refused to accept that future. They came together, initiated a fundamental transformation, and achieved what many thought was impossible. The result? A strengthened school system, a renewed civic culture, and a palpable sense of hope that has dramatically improved the quality of life for its residents. But this isn't just a feel-good story. It's a roadmap. It offers some powerful lessons and some counterintuitive insights about true civic change. Insights that could strengthen virtually any community or school system. How did they do it? They did it with the help of the Harwood Institute. And joining me today to help tell this powerful turnaround story is Rich Harwood, the Institute's founder and CEO. Welcome, Rich.
Good to be with you, Ken.
Well, I can't wait to have you lead us along this story, and we'll bring in the voices of the people you work with. But before we dive in, just say a bit about yourself and just a bit about the Harwood Institute.
The Harwood Institute began 38 years ago. I was 27 years old. We've been innovating for all these years about what engenders hope in people, what are the kinds of leaders and organizations we need that can bring people together across dividing lines, what does it mean for change to take root, grow, and spread in communities. And so fast forward 38 years, we're interested in how do you bridge divides? How do you create a culture of shared responsibility in communities? And importantly, Ken, and I think this is important for Reading and the story of Reading as well, how do we make community a common enterprise where community means everyone and all means all? And I think that was one of the challenges in Reading, and it's one of the things that folks there have taken action on and have made incredible progress on.
So let's go back where the story begins, or at least the story in Reading. When you first went there, I want you to give me your impressions of what you were seeing and hearing from people in Reading.
This community, 10 years before we began, was declared the poorest community in America. And people within Reading, people in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, people across America had given up on Reading and essentially turned their back on the community.
We did become known as the poorest city in the nation, which I think really created a sense of hopelessness. Getting beyond that negative light really was difficult for many people, I think. I'm Ashley Chambers. I am the Senior Vice President of Community Impact with the United Way of Berks County.
Well, one year we were technically the poorest city, and it's not a great designation, but it is a great city. My name is Steve Onsman. I'm the pastor of Calvary United Church of Christ in the city of Reading.
When it comes to the feel of the city of Reading, Reading is the fourth largest city in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The city has a rich, diverse fabric. Currently, 70% of the population that live in the city proper identify as Latino or Hispanic. It's a community that, like any urban community, has its challenges. My name is Michael Toledo. I am currently the president and CEO of Centro Hispano, a nonprofit organization in our community that's been serving the greater Reading community for the last 50 years.
Reading, as everyone knows, has been called the poorest city in America. A lot of underemployed people, a lot of unemployed people. The poverty rate was through the roof. My name is Karen Reitmeyer, and I am currently the Chief Strategy Officer of the Why Missing Foundation.
My name is Dave Myers. I had been the Executive Director of the Berks Alliance Institute initiative here in the city of Reading. I had been serving on the Reading School Board when the Harwood group started, and quite candidly, it was a challenge. There was a lot of disagreement among the board members and trying to do things together and collaborate. There was a lot of fighting between institutions. The school district was in fairly rough shape. It was the poorest school district in Pennsylvania. COVID was very disruptive. We had to shut down the school system. It caused a lot of businesses to have financial issues. And there's a need for leadership and collaboration in the community.
When we first went there, like a lot of communities, there were stores closed, there were a lot of folks on the street, and you've got this sense that the community was struggling. That's one part. But I think the other part for listeners that's really important is as I began to talk with folks there, you got this incredible sense of spirit that we can do better and we can be better, that we want to make a go of it. We just don't know how. We've tried so many things before that haven't worked, and we've lost a sense of possibility and hope, and we're looking for a way forward. We just can't quite imagine it yet.
You know, one of the important themes that I've taken away from this story is that civic leaders and foundation leaders and funders, education leaders didn't do what they normally do, which is to assume they know what the solution is. And you yourself said that you started the work by listening to people. So talk a little bit about how you didn't just go in with a plan to try to transform the city, but a lot of your work was a sort of systematic gathering of information from the people that live there.
When we first started working in Reading, it was the height of culture wars in the country. It was the height of debate over critical race theory, DEI, school board and school superintendent recalls, of book banning and other things. And our work was focused in Reading on education. Our task was first to develop a community-led, community-driven agenda around education. And everyone within Reading and outside said, that's never going to happen in this environment. And yet, we engaged folks all across Reading, both in English and in Spanish. We engaged leaders in in-depth individual interviews. And Ken, I have to tell you, not a single individual mentioned issues that you would hear in the culture war debates. What they talked about was where their community was, where they wanted their community to go, and importantly, they identified 9 key agenda items to move education forward, none of them rooted in culture war. And so that was the first step. The first step was, could we engage the community in a conversation not about problems, not about utopian visions, but about their shared aspirations for their community, their kids, and education? And out of that, could there be a community-led, community-driven education around education? The answer was an emphatic yes.
And so as you began to do your work and you shared your findings from your surveys or questions of the data gathering you did, not everyone was sold yet. In fact, some people resisted it. Can you talk a little bit about the reaction you got from some people?
Sure. You know, wherever the Institute works, there's always resistance. It comes in different forms. Did you talk to all the right people? Is this really what they said? But beyond that, I think there's a deeper resistance, which goes something like this. We've tried so many things here. We have spent so much money on those efforts, those civic efforts, and nothing ever came of them. Why should we try again? What difference is it going to make? Are we just going to repeat the past one more time and deepen the sense of frustration and cynicism and lost hope in the community? So that's one point of resistance. Another point of resistance is, look, we already know what to do. If folks would only listen to whoever is saying this, to me, and to my group and to my organization, everything would be fine. The problem is they just don't listen to me. So the task here, according to this individual, is I got to get more folks to listen to me and to buy into what I'm saying. And so then it just becomes a battle over who can be the loudest, who can gather the most people, but it doesn't really move things forward. So those are 2 common things we hear a lot in communities, and we definitely heard in Reading.
So one of the themes that has come up repeatedly in my conversations with people in Reading is that before Rich Harwood and his team came here, we were operating in silos. We were operating on our own. Talk a little bit about the the siloization, if I could use that word, of communities like Reading. I'm sure you've seen it in other places. What is it that causes that to happen?
When we first started working in Reading, what we heard was the community was fragmented in terms of organizations. We heard it was fragmented in terms of neighborhoods. We heard that there weren't very many leaders that people trusted. We heard that there weren't strong norms of there were strong norms of getting together, but not actually working together and having the hard conversations we need to have. There was a narrative that change can happen here. So under those conditions, when things are siloed and fragmented, they became that way because people believed, first of all, the more stress a system is under, the more people hunker down and look inward. That's just a natural human response. The more that there's a greater need in the community, the more we turn inward and believe we've got to provide the answer. The more that your funding is cut or there's a scarcity of funding, the more you believe that you've got to demonstrate that you're the answer to all the challenges in the community. The more that you feel as though people don't trust you as a leader and you're heading up an organization, the more you believe that you have to take singular heroic acts. And yet, all these things make us feel exhausted. All these things make us feel alone. All these things make us realize that as much as we're trying, no matter how hard and how fast we run, we're never going to get to where we need to go. All of these things, as they happen to us, when we do look up, we see that there's a growing youth violence in a place like Reading, that there's greater absenteeism in a place like Reading, that more and more kids are hungry in a place like Reading. And then I think the question you have to ask yourself is, if we continue to go it on our own alone, will we strengthen the community and will these kids really have a shot at fulfilling their God-given potential? Or will we continue to spiral downward? And I think when people begin to consider that, and when you then ask them, so what would it take for us to make change on this? Intuitively, we all know the answer to that. We've got to work together better. We've got to understand really the context that we're dealing with better. We have to understand what really matters to people and what's in the way of making progress better. We've got to learn how to talk to each other and listen to each other so we can know what the hell's going on. We've got to put one foot in front of the other, not try to solve all the problems at once, because that's never worked and it's never gonna work. We're just gonna have to make down payments and rebuild our trust and belief. And lo and behold, that's what happened in Reading. And that's what can happen in communities all across the country.
I think what the Harwood Institute did, before they even did anything, we had the leadership of the United Way and Centro Hispano and a number of other civic leaders who recognized that while a lot of people were doing a lot of good work, we were in silos, right? We were all, no matter what we tried to do, we would try to get together with things and we couldn't get people to work together, or we had 6 people doing the same thing and there were redundancies. And so it was through really their leadership that brought Harwood Institute into the process. And what I think the most important thing they did was they reminded us that we're supposed to be working together and that ego can't get in the way of making progress. I found this in my work with trying to get churches to work together. I've really struggled for the whole time I've been here to get some community movement. And it seems like people always want credit. So when you want credit, it's hard to share the limelight. So I think what the Harwood Institute has enabled us to do is it's taken these really great ideas and these really great organizations and said, here's the places where you're working together. Here's the places where you can find some common ground, and then helped us focus in on the few things that we really wanted to get done first. And that has been the real difference in the Harwood experience with us.
When they initially came and talked about what the Harwood initiatives were and what it entails and all these great things, I want to say I was a little skeptical initially. Okay? We've tried so many things. We've tried community work. We've tried to have forums. We've tried to coalitions, and these things were just not sustainable. I'm Magdalia Garcia. I am a resident of Reading, PA. I am working with Communities and Schools of Eastern Pennsylvania, and I'm a director of programs for that agency. The difference with the work that we've gotten into with Harwood is we saw something we all wanted. They brought so many agencies together. They brought community members together. They put us all in one room and said, let's figure it out. That was a starting point of unleashing the impact here.
One of the really profound insights that I took away, and I think listeners will too, is that what people learned to do was to stop being loud and telling people what they needed and start listening to people.
Once we produced this report, which outlined the agenda, 3 teams formed around the agenda items. And to your point, the first thing that people had to do was not to develop plans. It was not to go out and find more money. It was not to run some kind of regression analysis. It was not to look at best practices from some other community, all things that we all do reflexively and religiously in trying to create change in communities. They did something different. They stopped. They decided that they're going to have to go and engage more people more deeply around their agenda items like early childhood education or after school activities or English as a second language, and really deeply understand what was it that really mattered to people? What was preventing action from taking place? What is it that people really needed in order to improve their lives? And Ken, for your listeners, this sounds like an easy thing to do, but we're asking people to do something that ran against all the instincts and behaviors that we have, which is to believe we already know the answer, to believe we already know what people are going to tell us, to believe even if we listen, they're going to tell us things we already know. That when we hear things we already know, we already have the best practices in our hip pocket, so we're just going to pull them out and apply them no matter what they say. And what people also discovered was, I'm going to have to talk to folks in parts of town I've never been to that are different than me, that maybe pray to a different God than I do, that wear different clothes than I do, that eat different foods than I do, that maybe speak a different native language than I do. And that creates psychological barriers to people stepping forward and engaging, and not only engaging, but listening, and not only listening, but leaving their preconceived ideas and notions outside the room so they can actually hear what people are really trying to tell them.
There's another factor, too, that emerged in my conversations with people in Reading that is a bit of a deterrent to going out and do what you described, and that is I might hear things that seem critical of what I'm doing. Jennifer Murray, the former superintendent, told me, I read this report and some of the feedback I was getting, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is about me and my leadership. And that wasn't very pleasant, she said.
My name is Jennifer Murray. I am the former superintendent of the Reading School District. I worked in Reading School District for 27 years through being a teacher and a principal and a coach, a director of literacy, all the positions that I had. I was very much ingrained in the community, knew a lot of people, had taught their children and got the next generation after them. So I remember the first time I heard about the Institute coming in, and there were a lot of organizations across the nation that wanted to do case studies in our district or wanted to follow, a story or a student or a group. So it didn't surprise me that somebody was coming in to study not only the school district, but, the community at large. And I remember getting the first report, and it was like literally my first couple of months of being a superintendent. And mind you, even though I've been in Reading, my head was spinning. I had the board members. I wanted to do a good job, and to the community, there was a lot I felt like I had to prove. And I remember sitting down with Rich and Mike Toledo, the director of Centro, and they sat me down and said, look, this is a report. And they gave me a background because I didn't know a lot of the background that went into the organization of the actual study of what Rich was doing. And he said, this is very glaring. If you read it a certain way, it could point a lot of fingers at the school district. It's all about education. Right away, you get really defensive. You work in some place for a really long time and pour your heart out. And all the people around you are working really hard. And they said, but this isn't your responsibility. This isn't the school district's responsibility. It's the community's responsibility. And they want things to change. And when they can get organized and want things to change, really great things can happen about this. So I went home and I read the report. And I read it in a lens as the superintendent of the Reading School District. And it hurt. You're not going to lie. It hurt, stung, and all of those things I knew we could do better at. But it was just like, how? Like, we're already working this hard. And then I put it away. And I came back the next day and went about my business. And I opened up the report again and I read it with a different kind of mindset, a different thinking, saying, okay, I'm not going to read it as this being critical towards us. I want to read it as a launch pad to help us do better. And when I read it, I'm like, okay, these are some great ideas. Where do we get started? How do we organize? And how far can we go with this information?
It wasn't very pleasant for Dr. Murray, and I remember getting the emails and phone calls from Dr. Murray and her senior team that were quite critical of the report, and by extension, quite critical of the Institute. I had to say to them repeatedly, this isn't a report card on the school. In fact, it's not even a report card on education or the community. It's a set of aspirations about where the community seeks to go and how do we develop the civic strength of the community so that we can achieve those aspirations. And that as much as this is about education and education agenda, the schools are part of the larger education agenda. They are not the education agenda. To Dr. Murray's credit, she's one of the braver leaders I've worked with. She's one of the more insightful leaders I've worked with. And honestly, she's one of the more humble leaders I've worked with. She listened to us. She listened to the community. She listened to what I was trying to say. She stayed at the table and kept engaging. And while it took a little bit of time, the school district became one of the best partners, institutional partners that our teams had in Reading. When they could have remained behind their walls, they tore down their walls, they opened up their schools, and they became an even better partner with the community moving forward on what the community really values.
So I want to talk about what you did to help make that happen, because many people could have pushed you away, as she tried to do initially, but you and your team did something to create enough trust where she at some point said, okay, I want to keep engaging with you. But because I think for other people coming in and saying, we're going to share some data with you that you may be surprised to hear, you may not even agree with, and we're not interested. That was her first reaction. But you did something that enabled her to come back and say, we want to keep working with you. We want to listen to what you have to say.
Well, one is I think we kept engaging together in a conversation about what are we all trying to achieve when it comes to kids in Reading and the larger community. That's always first and foremost. If this becomes a discussion about the school district trying to defend itself, or a nonprofit trying to defend itself, or the institute, the Harwood Institute, trying to defend itself, we're in a zero-sum game. And that's a recipe for not moving forward. If we can instead focus on what the real goal is here, which is to improve the lives of every child in Reading, and realize that none of us can do that alone, and recognize that in order for us to work together, we're going to have to take some small steps and build trust and demonstrate that when we say something, we mean it and we follow through on it. And then we check to see if it worked. And then we take the next set of steps together. Then that's a different story. And I think that's ultimately what happened in Reading. And again, credit to Dr. Murray and her team. Most school superintendents that I work with do not do that. They do not. They do not stay in the game. They do not stay in the conversation. They do not exercise enough humility to hear and to listen, and ultimately to exercise enough courage to step into the community with the community, not acting upon the community. to help the community itself move forward.
Dr. Murray, after this sort of personal transformation, she began to realize that what you were offering and suggesting was not something that she should be defensive about, but she really started to embrace it. She needed to convince her principals that to view their schools not as these private domains, she said. This isn't your building. This is the community's building. This is the kids' building. And if the kids need after-school care, we need to work with our partners to let them in. I mean, that's a perfect example of this phrase you use about us turning outward and getting out of our silos. But she then had a challenge of convincing her school leaders to embrace that concept as well.
Yeah, look, there's resistance at every turn. And why not? People have been sold a bill of goods in education, every 6 months or a year or 2 years, there's some new fad that comes along that school principals and teachers have to implement. And then 6 months, a year, 2 years later, there's another one that they have to implement, and their head starts to spin around, and a new school superintendent comes in, and like, who can you believe? What can you believe? Why should you think this is going to be any different? And why should you, as a school principal or as a teacher, put your neck out to try to do something different if you think the rug's going to be pulled out from you in the next 6 months or a year or 2 years? And so in the case of Dr. Murray and school principals in Reading, there was some trust building that needed to take place. Resistance starts to go away when people see proof that things are actually happening in a different way, when we can send signals to them that it's actually happening, when we can start to demonstrate there's some momentum that's taking place here. All those things need to be present in Reading for not just principals to step forward, but for people throughout the community to step forward. Turning outward is a different way of thinking, and I think it challenges us to think about and to reckon with who owns the community. Do I own the community? Does the school district own the community? Does some nonprofit own the community? Or do we all share in ownership? And the task for each of us is to figure out what contribution can we make. That's one part. The other thing about turning outward is the effects that it has on each of us. We face an epidemic of loneliness in this country. Folks who are doing the work in communities feel exhausted and tired and feel like they can't make enough progress. And by turning outward, you begin to recognize that you're not alone, that we need to go together, and that there are other folks who are ready to go with you. Maybe not everyone, but enough to get started and make a difference. And that the more that you can make a difference and demonstrate proof that something different is happening, the more people want to join in. And the more people that want to join in, the more contagious it becomes, the more momentum you build, and then you've got something real going. That's the story of Reading.
I want to thank Rich Harwood and the leaders from Reading who were part of this episode. And listeners out there, I want to urge you to tune in to the second and final episode of this series, where you'll hear from leaders from Reading describing 3 important initiatives that emerged from their work with the Harwood Institute. You'll hear about new after-school activities, about support Family Scout for English as a second language, and about new early childhood education programs. Something very different is indeed playing out in Reading. I also want to mention that you can download a free copy of a study guide that summarizes the key lessons learned from this story and offers some actionable steps that leaders can take in their communities. The guide and other related resources are available at schoolconversations.org/Reading, that's READING, and at theharwoodinstitute.org/Reading. Bye, everyone.